Last weekend, I had the honor and the privilege of wrestling one of the finest competitors in the business today. Doug Williams and Scotty Mack, a three-way dance in Dublin City, tested my body, my spirit. More than anything else, made me wish that I never left the womb. That's Doug Williams, Ring of Honor, Noah, FWA Heavyweight Champion, the guest tonight on the Bagpipe Report. Hey Jody, we got some coffee?
Yeah,
How about some aspirin?
I think there's some on the press.
Morphine? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Bagpipe Report. We're going to start with the news tonight. Our top story, it looks like after months of hassle and aggravation, we talked a little bit about it last week on the show, Ring of Honor and TNA may finally be coming back together a little bit. Of course, these are competing organizations, but ever since the Ring of Honor scandal broke a few months ago, where Rob, who founded Ring of Honor, and RF Video, Rob Feinstein Video, got himself in a wee bit of personal trouble. There has been trouble between the organizations because TNA didn't want to be involved with Ring of Honor because of the repute on their reputation. The situation as it stands now, a report in the Wrestling Observer states that Alex Shelley and Chad Collier will be allowed in the next couple of weeks to work for both shows. That immediately seems to open the door up for speculation that AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, so many of the top guys who worked for both companies and have developed their names with both companies the last 2 years will now be allowed to work with Ring of Honor again because until this point, TNA didn't want that to happen. We're going to have to see how this develops in the next couple of weeks, but it's going to be a very positive thing for those headliners on the Indian and national United States scene. The only people who may lose out in this situation is that when the story broke a few months ago and TNA retracted their towels, or at the very least, they couldn't ever really retract them, but said that they've wanted their workers not to work for Ring of Honor, and they essentially had to make a choice. Ring of Honor turned around and said, well, that's okay because we'll bring up a whole bunch of new fresh faces. Guys, we hadn't heard of a lot of guys over in this part of the world and even in the United States. The Paul Londons and the Spankies and so many great wrestlers out there. We'll give the chance to new guys. Now with AJ Styles and Chris Daniels, it's good for them to go back to Ring of Honor if that can so happen. But unfortunately, it seems to close the door a little bit on some of the newer up-and-coming talents of Ring of Honor. Nonetheless, more promotions working together and hopefully are getting past this whole scandal. So congratulations to everybody involved, and the next couple of weeks we'll see where we're going. On Saturday, July 31st, Sean Waltman returns to the ring for Ultimate Pro Wrestling in California. His opponent will be Frankie Kazarian, known very well for his work in NWA TNA. Sean Waltman has been out of the news for quite a while right now. It's about 2 years since he stopped working with WWE. He was let go by the company. And in that time, there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of interest in his on-again, off-again relationship with Joni Laurer, i.e., a.k.a. China. Right now, it doesn't seem as if Sean Waltman is promoting a full-time return to the ring, and he himself has said he's had some injury worries the last couple of months and the last year. But this could be a return to form for Sean Waltman. Only time will tell. Check out upw.com for Ultimate Pro Wrestling. You'll get all the information right there. Now, the trailer for Triple H's upcoming cameo appearance, extended cameo, is now online. Blade 3, check it out at bladetrinity.com. Triple H's appearances in WWE have been very interesting this summer to date because most people expected that he'd be gone slightly after WrestleMania. That hasn't panned out. There are two movie projects I personally heard of. There was a biker project where he'd play a biker in a biker movie. That would be run primarily by WWE, was going to promote that. And the second movie was, of course, the very high-profile sequel to Conan the Barbarian, where there was talk that he would take over the role of Conan, which would, of course, be, if Hunter is interested in a Hollywood career, a major coup, given that that was once played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, governor of California. Because Hunter has been around longer than expected, the booking for the main event has been slightly odd. We saw last week in Vengeance, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, that he failed to win the WWE Championship from Chris Benoit. Only a couple of weeks ago, there was talk that instead of Hunter in that role, it would be Edge challenging Chris Benoit for the title. And in fact, they seemed to tease that when Edge and Benoit were tag team champions just last month. However, I wouldn't count chickens yet on Edge versus Benoit not happening. Benoit still has the world title, and Edge is now on a major push. At Vengeance, he defeated Randy Orton for the Intercontinental Championship clean in the ring, which certainly suggests that he's majorly on his way up in WWE. Something I found interesting is that fan reactions to Edge since he's returned have been mixed at best, and Vengeance was a very good example of this. At a lot of occasions during the match, people were chanting more for Orton than they were for Edge. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, when WWE was on tour in this part of the world, he received boos in Dublin City, right here in Ireland, and in England as well. They actually turned him heel for a night. I believe he was working Ric Flair for that show, simply because he wasn't getting the kind of appreciation that they would have liked. All this adds up to perhaps we'll see Edge versus Benoit, with Edge playing the heel at some point. Totally unconfirmed as of now, but one thing's for sure, both these guys are champions and going forward. And as of right now, we don't know what the situation is with Triple H's movie career, so the next couple of months seem to be very interesting when it comes to the WWE World title. Also in injury news, we've got a man returning to WWE. It seems that the Ultimo Dragon will actually be returning to action for the company. You'll remember last year he debuted to much fanfare, and right from the opening show, they seemed to be pushing the idea of Rey Mysterio, who was then Cruiserweight Champion as he is now, taking on the Ultimo Dragon. Dragon is one of the all-time legends in professional wrestling. Of course, the Asai moonsault, his real name is Asai, was actually named after him, that moonsault to the floor from the second rope. There seems to be talk right now that he's going to return without his mask, which I find to be an interesting move, because when Rey Mysterio entered WWE, they put his mask back on him because they felt it was more marketable. His push, the Ultimo Dragon, since he's entered WWE, has been less than favorable, and his only way to make it to WrestleMania 20 was to be a part of a very short, ill-conceived Cruiserweight Battle Royale. One can only hope that this talented star will be given the opportunity to show fans what he has if and when he returns to WWE later this year. Now it's time for this week's Norton's Notes. Jeff Hardy, just a couple of weeks ago, made his debut in NWA TNA. There's been a lot of talk the last few weeks that they're trying to get him in for a long-term contract, possibly a one-year contract. Is this really a good idea, though, for NWA and for Jeff Hardy? Here's what I'm going to talk about this week. First of all, take a look at Jeff Hardy's situation. You got to ask yourself, is he ready to recommit to the wrestling business? When he parted ways with WWE about a year ago, he chose on his own free will to leave. WWE said, "We're a little concerned about you. We want you to go to rehab." As opposed to doing that, Jeff said, "You know what? I really don't want this right now," and he left. In the last year, he's only had a couple of matches on the independent circuit. If guys want to go back to the company immediately, Eddie Guerrero, case in example, they're going to work more dates. They're going to try to prove themselves. Jeff Hardy has done everything but. He's only had a couple of shows, and reportedly the shows he has worked, including the NWA TNA show, he's been late to. Now look at it from the other side. Look at it from NWA TNA. What do they have to gain? Well, Jeff Hardy is a big star. He's a big star from WWE, and there's no doubt that bringing him in the short term would do a lot to enhance their exposure and make people, perhaps for the first time, want to take a look at NWA TNA. But in the long run, they've got a lot more to lose than that, says I. Look at a situation like this. You've got a locker room full of guys. You've got morale, which is high, because even though, as we'll be discussing a little bit later on, Jeff Jarrett holds the title right now, you got a locker room full of long-term committed guys having great matches every week, many of which are on contract to NWA TNA. These are all guys who've been with the company by and large from the very beginning. AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Ron Killings, America's Most Wanted. They spend a lot of time with the company building it up. What does it say to them when they're trying to climb that ladder and another star who isn't even a full-time wrestler anymore comes in and is given their TV time up at the top of the card? Is that really the best thing for morale within the company? Another question I've got to ask is, when you take talent like that who are in it for the long term, do you want to take that time that you're using to push them, the guys like the Daniels and the AJ Styles, who, as we discussed earlier, work for other promotions? They'll be working for Ring of Honor again, hopefully soon. They're enhancing NWA's personality and their long-term exposure the same way as vice versa. If NWA TNA takes that time that they're investing in stars that intend to be there 3 years, 5 years down the line, and they put that time in Jeff Hardy, who is right now apparently more committed to music and would possibly go back to that in 1 year. 1 year from now, will TNA be in a better position or a worse one when they're losing one of the guys they've been investing in? That's this week's Norton's Notes. And for the move of the week this week, we have one of the infamous new daredevils of professional wrestling, Jack Evans, performing a 630 splash. What makes a 630 splash so interesting is that it pretty much invites death. I've done some pretty high-flying things in wrestling, and there's no way in heaven and earth that you'll ever, ladies and gentlemen, ever see me do anything like this. Jack is a young guy, an amazing performer, a great gymnast. A couple of years ago, I toured with him up in Calgary with Stu Hart and Stampede Wrestling, and he'd come out in the evenings and do these gymnastic shows in Stu and Helen's front room where he'd do triple backflips and handstands and backflips off chairs, and he's really got to be seen to be believed. Now in the United States, we're getting that chance. This is Jack Evans with the 630.
Breaker and a Petey Williams. Jack Evans up top. Jack Evans up top. 630. 630. 630. He caught him with it. 630. 1, 2, 3. It's over. And that's it. And that's it.
Okay, this past Sunday night, WWE presented Vengeance. It was a Raw brand pay-per-view with the double headline main event in a lot of people's eyes. Chris Benoit defended his world title against Triple H in the main, and we also had Randy Orton defending the IC title against Edge. Once again on the line we have from Washington, Brian Alvarez, editor of the Figure 4 weekly newsletter, and you can also see his work online at WrestlingObserver.com, and all the information about the newsletter is right there as well. How are you getting on this week, Brian?
Pretty good.
Good. Let's start off with some of the undercard matches right here. We had Matt Hardy versus Kane, which I was actually very surprised to see Matt Hardy win the match, and I'm not sure where they're going with either of these guys because I keep hearing that Hardy is injured right now, that he might have to go out for surgery, and Kane, character-wise, you know, I've heard we've heard that this pregnancy angle with Lita might go on as long as 9 months, but it's really hard to see where the character goes from here. What did you make of the match and their futures?
Well, I was totally shocked when Matt won, and you know, part of that is because it really made no sense because Matt has been booked as such a loser for so long that by having him beat Kane, it was almost like everybody considered it a fluke and it hurt Kane. So, you know, I'm not sure what they can do with it. And then Lita last night on Raw was talking about how this proved Matt could win his own battles, and there was no reaction from the crowd because it really proved nothing because nobody takes Matt seriously still to this day. But, yeah, he's hurt. He's got a bad knee, and I assume at some point he's going to have to go in for surgery. So this might have been his big win prior to getting destroyed and being put out of action for several months. But as far as I know, they're going to go, you know, the distance with the Lita pregnancy angle. So I can only imagine how they're going to fill 9 months with the storyline. But
eight and a half months of gold to go. Then we move on to Chris Jericho versus Batista. I was a little disappointed with this one because I've liked Batista. I think he's getting better. I think he's got good stage presence, but of course he's had a lot of very good tag team matches recently, which I suppose are obviously far less meaningful in carrying your load than one-on-ones. I didn't think it was that great a match, and I'm not quite sure where the finish leaves Jericho because he lost the match. They had a little caveat of his foot being under the ropes. But again, I'm not quite sure where they're going with either because I don't see Jericho contending for the world title. He almost seems too far ahead to go to the IC title, and they've got both Edge and Orton working in that division right now. And on the other half of things, we've got Batista, who is an important player in Evolution visually, but as a standalone character doesn't seem to have any particular direction either. Your thoughts?
I think this was just a match that they kind of threw together because they didn't really have a card, and they had to have somebody win. So, but he's kind of a guy where he's almost more Ric Flair than anybody in Evolution aside from Ric Flair, because he knows that it doesn't matter how many times he does a job, he's still going to be over. So he's kind of like the Evolution job guy. But, it was just a match. I think, neither guy had a great night, because last night on Raw, Batista and Edge, was shockingly good. And I never expected that in 1,000 years. And this probably should have been better, but, whatever.
We move right ahead. We have Ric Flair and Eugene versus La Resistance. And in fact, I should mention right now, this is going out as we tape this right now. Of course, we're talking about things which have happened in the U.S., but Raw doesn't come on here until an hour or two later. So we're going to avoid spoiling the conclusions of the matches. The matches themselves is okay. Ric Flair and Eugene versus La Resistance. I thought this was a lot of fun. I thought the finish was kind of silly. Your typical DQ, this, whatever. It's sort of pretty much a non-finish that had any meaning. The match itself was cute and fun. It didn't really leave us anywhere at the end of the day, but I thought it was a little bit of fun.
Yeah, well, clearly they, they didn't want to change the tag belts and they didn't want to beat Eugene yet. Just still undefeated going into that show. So, it was an entertaining match, and for a long time, I didn't know how they could keep Eugene's character fresh over a long period of time, because it seemed like, kind of something that would work for a few weeks, and then after that, what do you do with him? But he's kind of got a gimmick now where he does the spots of everybody that he's either in the ring with or he's tagging with, and something like that, can extend his shelf life quite a bit. So
I suppose you got 30 wrestlers, you got 30 weeks of matches, right?
Yeah, and the fans loved it, so I have nothing to complain about.
Before we get on to the double main event, Victoria versus Molly Holly, I really liked. It was a short match like all women's matches are, and I particularly liked the finish because it wasn't your typical run-in, this, that, whatever that we see a lot from the main promotions, and all promotions these days, let's face it. And I thought Victoria did a really nice job of selling that arm.
Yeah, that was one of those matches where, I think that it was put in death position, number one. So, nobody in the crowd cared, and I think a lot of people at home probably went to get something to eat during it. But it was one of those matches where, if you actually watch it, it was a really good match for what it was.
Yeah.
But it was just, there was nothing that could be done about it. But Molly's, I guess, the number one contender out of it, so, it achieved something, I guess.
Now let's move on to the main event. Chris Benoit versus Triple H. I didn't doubt that this one would be a very good match going in. Indeed, I thought it was a very good match. I liked the way it boiled down. And again, a lot like Edge and Orton, it did have a much more old school feel to it than we would have seen maybe a year, 3-5 years ago. The finish really turned me off because I knew Eugene would be involved. We were all told that, it was pretty much on every billboard from here to Massachusetts going into the match. But it was just booked so elaborately, and I came out of it thinking, okay, Hunter doesn't look any better. If anything, he looks like he's starting to become a choke artist, which I never thought I would ever say. Chris Benoit made me question because, people going to the match are actually chanting his name in the arena, even though his gimmick and people accept he's more of a technical hardcore wrestler for more hardcore wrestling fans. And the fact that he hit Eugene, I think sort of almost throws him into that tweener capacity, even though I'm not sure they meant to do that, but it came across that way to me. And Eugene's in a slightly odd situation. Of course, that'll change this week on Raw possibly, but we won't get into that too much. What do you think of the match itself and of the way the finish was booked?
Well, I think the reason that this kind of upset people was the point of this match was to continue a story. And that's why, they had to have 17 million run-ins, and they had to have Eugene there, and they had to have this, that, and the other thing. And I think this, particularly upset some people because Benoit and Hunter could have such a great match with nobody running in or anything. So I think that was the main problem. And, if you look back to the Monday Night Wars, sometimes there would be main events where it would just be 17 billion people running in, and people would have no problem with it. And that was usually because it would involve maybe a McMahon or something like that, where you couldn't really expect a good match or anything like that, and the people were actually waiting to see what the angle would be at the end.
Yeah.
So this was different in that you had two great wrestlers, and the fact that everybody was running in kind of detracted from the match that they could have had, and I think that made people upset. But, we're going to have Benoit and Hunter down the road again. And when you look at, like, the Raw storylines, it's just too bad that this had to take place on pay-per-view because they've done a really good job with the Hunter storyline and the Eugene and Benoit and everybody like that. And without spoiling Raw, it comes to a head on Raw. So it really makes sense what they did in the match when you actually watch that show. But at the same time, this is a match you had to pay $34.95 for to see a bunch of dudes running in. So I can see how people would be upset.
With Edge winning the championship, the way it was handled at the pay-per-view and all that, do you think that it's going to be devalued over the next month or two, the fact that he took it? Obviously, he's getting a big push, but in short order, do you think the title will lose a bit of meaning because it's gone from Orton right now? Or do you think that the 7 months build-up will continue to go on and thrive now that Edge has the championship?
Well, the thing is, there was a certain point where the IC title meant something, and this was a few months ago. And after that point, it really didn't matter when Orton lost it. I mean, he could have held it for 10 years, or he could have held it for as long as
And
it
it wouldn't mean any more than it did.
I don't think it was ever going to mean too much more than it did, right now.
Yeah.
And Edge, the people are into Edge enough, and the match was good enough that they take him seriously as champion, which means the belt still means as much now as it meant, 3 days ago.
And I think the fact as well that it was a clean finish, it helps ensure that the transition was smooth.
Yeah. And people don't see this as a fluke, and they don't see Edge as a fluke or anything like that. So the belt, I think it still means as much as it meant 3 days ago. It just depends on, if they try and book Edge in a similar fashion to the way that they booked Orton. I mean, if Edge is doing 100 non-title jobs, and if he loses the belt quickly, it'll be dead just as, dead as it's ever been. But if they keep him strong and they keep the belt strong, everything's good.
Okay, Brian, thank you for joining us again this week. That is your Vengeance recap, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. Okay, it's Supercard time. This past week, we had a best of Supercard from the Wrestling Channel, which basically meant we took the very best matches from all the various promotions we've had here on TWC the last few months and combined them into one special presentation. We're talking about World of Sport. You had Mike Jordan versus the legendary Johnny Saint. From Ring of Honor, we brought in AJ Styles versus Paul London versus Low Ki. I believe that was from their first anniversary show. Just an amazing match. NWA TNA, Teddy Hart, the third generation professional wrestler, versus Juventud Guerrera as part of that X Division tournament a couple of months ago we saw right here on TWC. It was a great show. Here's a little look back at what you missed if you did not see the best of Supercard right here on TWC. That was what we had this past week on the Supercard, and this Sunday we're going to do it all over again. This time we got the Yokohama Mega Ride from Gaia Wrestling in Japan. I've said it once and I'll say it again. You don't think women can wrestle? Check out Gaia. Here's a little preview of the Yokohama Mega Ride. It's time for this week's Match of the Week. We got a great one for you this week, ladies and gentlemen. It's Spanky versus Paul London. You'll know both guys more famously from their WWE careers, yes, but long before they joined up with New York, they were fantastic performers on the independent circuit in the United States and beyond. Spanky, of course, you've seen on SmackDown, and he chose essentially to leave WWE a few months ago. He said, hey, I'm not entirely happy here because I want to go out, I want to work great matches, much like the one we got him in right here. His opponent, Paul London, is stuck with the company, and we can only hope that we see more of him because he's one of the best cruiserweights the country has to offer right now. This is Spanky versus Paul London from Ring of Honor.
And right now this match is starting extremely even as Spanky goes for the roll-through crucifix headlock on Paul London. Paul London kicks out at 2. Listen, and there's been a lot of surefire picks. We're on the road to glory, if you will. Beautiful move there. Next few minutes, maybe another high-risk move, and he might score the 3 count. Slice bread number 2. It's the greatest thing since slice bread. This could be it. Beautiful. And now the winner of your match, Spanky, as he advances in tournament right now. Spanky is your winner of this match.
Welcome back to the show. We've got our first in-house guest tonight. He's an ambassador for wrestling in this part of the world. You'll know him very well in England, but you'll also know him very well in the United States and Japan. He's a global traveler, and his name inspires respect wherever he goes. He's the current FWA Frontier Wrestling Alliance Heavyweight Champion, a promotion you can see right here on the Wrestling Channel. Ladies and gentlemen, all across the world, this is Doug Williams. Doug, how are you doing?
Hi there. Very well, thanks.
Good. Well, I wanted to kick off especially because you're from England, which is great
Indeed,
for us. Because, I mean, most of our guests come on from the States, because a lot of the big names are over there. But you have transcended that. Not only are you a big name in the States and Japan, but also you came from England. I want to touch on, just to start off with, how did you become a wrestling fan growing up in England?
It was basically down to my father. He used to take me to shows when I was like 6 or 7 years old, live shows at the local halls near where I lived, and I sort of, followed it from an early age, watching it then, and obviously grew up watching it, both live and on television.
I heard that you had a martial arts background.
Sure, yeah, I did judo for 8 years, started when I was 11, and basically wrapped it up when I was 19.
I'm curious because I've been told by a couple of people who've done martial arts before, who came by training, that the falls you take are very similar.
Yeah, I mean, all the break falls you take in wrestling, they're basically exactly the same as what you're doing. Certainly my discipline that I had, which was judo, certainly, and it helped. I mean, it helped a great deal.
When you were growing up, a lot of the trainees, and we're going to move on to this in a second, but a lot of the trainees I've been working with these last few months, several of them, their family isn't very supportive of them. You were talking about how your father took you to shows. Have your family and your wife, has everybody been supportive of being in such a challenging business?
Yeah, generally, because I think they trust me to do what I think is the right thing. And the other thing is that I've always backed it up with having something else, going on in the background, just in case I get injured, just in case it does fall through. So I haven't put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak, with just pro wrestling. So I think in that respect I have got decent support from all of them.
Now, I think we're going to throw up a little bit of footage here in a second, but you were today just down at the Irish Whip Wrestling training facility, and I know you've done that before. Do you do a lot of these, a lot of workshops with aspiring up-and-coming wrestlers?
I do like maybe 2 or 3 a month. I go around to various schools. I mean, there's quite a lot in England, up and down the country. I'm always there. In fact, I've got one coming up in August at the Future Shock Wrestling School in Manchester. 3-day training seminar.
How do you find it? What do you get out of that?
I get to possibly develop my own skills in terms of showing maybe the next generation, the younger generation, the stuff that I've learned and the stuff that I grew up with, watching live shows, which probably they would never get a chance to do anymore. Especially the British style that you see on the World of Sport and things like that. So I sort of caught the back end of that, so hopefully I can sort of pass that on to the new generation.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You were talking a minute ago about how you always have something going on in the background, because in wrestling you can injure yourself at any given time.
Sure.
What's the most serious injury you've had in your career?
Probably I tore ligaments in my right shoulder back in about 8 years ago, 96 I think. Put me out for 13 weeks. I had like 8 weeks of physio and 6 weeks in a sling. That's probably the worst thing I've ever done. Any other, I mean, I'm always injured basically, but any other injury I have hasn't stopped me in the ring. I managed to work around it or work through it even.
A lot of people say their first injury, their first major injury, changes their perspective. And when you talk about, you know, famous English wrestlers, you go back to the 70s where you had Giant Haystacks who's passed on, the Dynamite Kid who is now in a wheelchair, Davey Boy Smith who passed away before he was 40. When you're injured or when you have a stinger or when these things happen, does it make you question how much you should do in the ring?
Not particularly, no. No, it's a funny, you should ask that, it's a funny thing, but I never ever second guess it. I accept that it is a consequence of the business, and if you can get that in your mind, then I think you're okay. If you start holding back, start worrying about things, that's when I think even worse injuries can occur. Because of course you're hesitating all the time.
Yeah. Now moving on to some of your global experience right here, Japan, United States, as we already mentioned, England, you've been through Europe as well. I find it interesting that there is so much talent in the UK. I had the chance to go there for the first time a couple of months ago with Brian Dixon's All-Star Wrestling, but you don't hear about it outside England. Whereas in the States, I mean, people over here, especially with TWC, but even before that, people were aware of Ring of Honor, they're not just WWE, but Ring of Honor, of CZW, of a lot of larger indies. Why do you think it is that we keep our eyes on the States so much and not so much in Europe when there's so much talent over here?
I mean, the biggest company in the world is based in the United States, so that's obviously always going to be the focal point of wrestling, and obviously the smaller companies that exist around the United States will get similar coverage purely for that fact. It's unfortunate because the European scene as a whole, not just Britain but also Germany, France, even Scotland and Ireland, some of the countries around there, they all have decent scenes. There's all got 4 or 5 promotions that are running reasonably regularly. You're probably talking 100 to 200 pro wrestlers in Europe that work almost full time, but none of it seems to get covered, unfortunately. And I think it's just that we're so far removed from any other major area of wrestling.
Right.
You know, be it Japan or Mexico or the United States.
Right now you're a global traveler. If you have the opportunity to stay in one place, like for example, a major company like WWE or NWA are starting to get towards that level. You already work for Noah in Japan. Would you like to stay in one region of the world for an extended period of time?
No, not at the moment, to be honest with you. I still like travelling about different places. The way I am at the moment, it's nice because I can still live, you know, in my preferred place. I can still live in England and still get to travel the world. The fear I have if I joined one major company full time is that I'd have to stay in a place far removed from home, basically.
Now, when's the first time you went to work in Japan?
It would be May last year, May 2003.
What were your expectations going in? Because people always say, you know, Japan, they're stiff, they're hard.
Yeah, my expectations were that it would be difficult, that it would, you know, that I'd come out of it sorer than I had been, say, anywhere else. Also, the problem with the language barrier. You know, I had an expectation that it might be a long, hard slog, basically. Luckily, it wasn't half as bad as I thought it would be.
Did you enjoy it?
I did enjoy myself, yeah.
Now, one of the most memorable matches I've seen you a part of was on TWC a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And it was the match last year when you went over to the States and you won back the FWA strap from Christopher Daniels, the Fallen Angel. What were your thoughts on working with Chris and what do you think of that match?
That's probably like the 4th or 5th time I've worked with Chris. We get on pretty well. That is my personal favourite match with him, by far. I don't know what it was that night, but we managed to gel together very, very. He's one of the people that I have that in-ring chemistry that I always have had from the very first moment we stepped in the ring together. You don't get that very often. There's probably 3 or 4 guys I say I have that with in the whole world, and Chris is definitely one of them.
Who else would you say?
I don't want to go naming too many names because, you know, some people get a little bit funny, but Flash Barker from England, FWA, he's definitely another guy I have that in-ring chemistry with.
Now moving on to the United States, Ring of Honor, which we've already mentioned, they've got I don't want to be disrespectful in this sense, but they have the gimmick of sort of the respect, the handshake, and a lot of that came out of because WWE and a lot of mainstream promotions had so much brawling and so much run-ins and so much entertainment
Sure.
that they wanted to turn it the other direction. What do you feel? Do you feel that's a genuine direction, and what do you think about it?
I think it is, but I think they struggled a little bit because they have had to diversify quite a lot away from that original code of honour. But they're now trying to get back to that with, I mean, they've got the Pure Wrestling title now, which is going to center. Obviously, they're going to center more of that style on the code of honour. But it was a unique, shall I say, twist on, you know, original professional wrestling to just try and stick to that style. A bold move, and initially it worked, I think.
Have you ever had contact with NWA TNA?
Yeah, I've done a dark match for them last year. That went reasonably well.
Any interest in going back there?
Yeah, they said, I mean, Jerry Jarrett and Jeff said to me themselves, you know, anytime you want to come back, you're welcome to. But it's literally down to a question of time and being in the right place at the end of the day.
Do you think right now that if you were to go back to TNA, would that be a conflict between them and Ring of Honor at this point?
Right, I believe so, considering the situation, the alleged situation between the two companies. Yeah.
In WWE now, we've got Chris Benoit as champion. Until a couple of weeks ago, we had Eddie Guerrero as champion. In TNA, even guys like Jeff Jarrett, AJ Styles, who are relatively smaller guys, because typically, even in, like we were talking about Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks in England, and back in the US, it was always the big guys a lot because of WWF, and now there seems to be more of a climate, more of an appreciation for people who can really work, the Kurt Angles, that whole thing. Does that make it easier for you to work in the States, do you think?
I don't think so, no, because outside of WWE, there isn't very many heavyweights left in the States. I'm actually one of the larger guys on the independent scene in the States. I don't think my size had anything to do with me being booked there at all, to be honest. It was all the style that I employ.
If there was a super promotion in England, like WWE is to the US, that was so big that they had television every week, they had major production values, they had wrestlers being paid far more than anywhere else, do you think there would be any concern that, much like in the US, that some of the smaller promotions would then dry up and there'd only be one company to work for?
That might be a problem, yes, because of course geographically you're talking about a much smaller area as well, so there's much less for everyone to be fighting for. So that could happen, but you know, you and I know that's probably a long way off. Realistically.
Overall, talking about crowds all over the world, who are your favorite kind of fans to work for? Not just the promotion, but the style of fans, because we've seen they're very diverse.
Yeah, Japanese fans definitely, because they're still emotionally drawn into matches, more so than any other country I've ever been. They still, you know, genuinely have that emotion attached to a lot of matches, and because of that, you can tell that their reactions are much more real, much more emotional than anywhere else. They don't just pop for big moves and whatever. They feel for the wrestler in the ring. You know what he might or might not be going through, and that makes it much more of a. I'd say much more meaningful when you work in front of them.
You're on the road so much these days. It must make it very difficult on nutrition, particularly when you're in different regions.
It's all about planning ahead, really, and you know, I mean, I make sure I take plenty of decent protein with me when I go on the road, and that, of course, it runs out inevitably. But yeah, so it's all about planning ahead, and that's the only way you can counter it. You say when all you can eat on the road is whatever Burger King or fast food joints, or just stop at services, then unless you've got something, unless you've planned ahead and made sure you've got the right things, it is quite difficult.
With your schedule, we've seen this happen to so many people. Is there ever a temptation to use drugs or substances which might speed up your metabolism? There's so many different degrees of. Is there ever a temptation when you can't make a workout and you can't get a good meal to go in that direction?
Yeah, I guess there would be. Again, it's a case of planning ahead. If you're planning ahead, then that shouldn't be a problem. But I might have seen with some guys, if they're struggling, then they'll pop the Pro Plus or something like that, keep themselves awake.
What are your aspirations from here? You've made your mark in every major territory. Everybody knows your name. Where would you like to be from here?
Obviously, I'd like to in Japan, raise my profile a bit. In Japan, I've obviously, it's early days in Japan, I'm just starting out there. You know, maybe gun for a few titles over there, against a few of the bigger heavyweights. Of course, I'm always interested in sampling a bit of maybe WWE. You know, even if I go there and I'm there for a year or two down the line. That's, I mean, that's the last big territory, the last big area still to explore for me.
You were talking earlier about liking right now traveling around so much. Does that mean that if WWE offered you a contract, you'd have to think more about it now than maybe 3 years from now or 5 years from now, when you might be looking for stability more than anything else?
Well, that's a tricky question. To be perfectly honest with you, it all comes down to the money side of it, what they would offer.
If they offer,
it might be more. It might be better for me if I made my name, say in Japan, such that I'm a bigger name in 3 years' time, such that WWE would then offer me a bigger contract than they might do now.
Whereas now perhaps they might hire you and you mightn't get off that bottom
Exactly,
line.
exactly.
And the UK and Ireland, when will we see you next?
Well, I'm back in America next weekend for Ring of Honor.
Ring of Honor, that's right.
Yeah, and then my next shows in England after that are FWA at Morecambe on the 31st of July, and then the 1st of August I'm in Hull for a new promotion that just started up. That's my next 2 shows in England.
That's great, and of course you've got all your upcoming appearances and dates and all that on your website, which I believe is doug-williams.co.uk.
Correct. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Well, Doug Williams, FWA Champion, thank you very much for joining us here on TBR, and best of luck.
Thanks a lot, bro. Cheers.
It's competition time again. We had so many responses last week that Acclaim Video Games have given us another console and another copy of Showdown, Legends of Wrestling. This week we've got a new question for you. Which of the following promotions has Hulk Hogan not wrestled for? The answer is either A, NWA TNA, B, New Japan Pro Wrestling, or C, Memphis Championship Wrestling. You can give us your answer via text 88066, and you need to phrase it just like this: Legend A, Legend B, or Legend C. Once again, it's which promotion has Hulk Hogan not wrestled for? A is NWA TNA, B is New Japan Pro Wrestling, and C is Memphis Championship Wrestling. You got 2 weeks. The closing date is Sunday, July 25th. Now it's time for this week's Q&A. The first question we have comes from Ryan Graves. It's quite a long one. He asks, what do you think of how the NWA World title is being treated right now? It reminds me of how the Raw World title is being traded between people and always goes back to Triple H, in TNA's case, Jeff Jarrett. Now, do you believe that this is degrading one of the most important world title belts in the world, or is it just the business these days and TNA believe that they have to copy WWE in every detail, including trading around the NWA World's title for no other reason than to make one person look good? Now, as I said, I've heard this a couple of times in this business, and it's really a situation where you have to look at it from the situation of the promoters. First of all, the NWA World title, what was that really worth before NWA TNA came along? As far as most people are considered, it was pretty much a dead title. It's been a regional championship for a long, long time since they split with WCW back in the early 90s. So I dispute how much it was worth, or the fact that it could be degraded by NWA TNA at this point in the NWA's existence. More than that, you look back at the history of wrestling, promoters always go with people they believe in, people they trust. TNA is run by the Jarretts, so Jeff Jarrett has the title. This sometimes happens at the expense of players. Sometimes this prevents up-and-coming wrestlers from getting their due. Sometimes it prevents people getting an opportunity, a fair shot, and a shot to make money for everybody involved because they worry too much about Jeff Jarrett, the person in that situation, for example. However, Jeff Jarrett is also the most reliable person in the entire company. He's got more in it than any other worker. So I think it's unfair to say that it's family bias, which to a degree it is, but it makes sense. You've got a business standpoint, it makes sense. Over in WWE, same thing with Triple H, who is now in the McMahon family. Vince McMahon, for several years, has trusted that Triple H would be around. He has trusted that he'll go out on the road, he'll do what is asked of him, and he'll represent the title. For 5 years since he first won the title, he has done that. So don't forget, there's always an other side of the coin. And I think personally that if either WWE or TNA traded the title back and forth every month or had a dozen different people holding it a year, I personally feel that would make the title worth a whole lot less. Our next question this week comes from Sean Carney in Mayo, Ireland. He asks, Blake, is there any plans to show Irish Whip Wrestling or NWA Ireland and NWA UK Hammerlock on TWC in the near future? Well, Sean, we've had discussions with both promotions already, and the door definitely remains open. It really comes down to whether these promotions choose to focus on their television product or their live product, because you have to remember, there's a whole lot of different areas you can specialize in professional wrestling. We've already shown Irish Whip Wrestling in the past. We showed Jake the Snake Roberts and many other top stars wrestling in Dublin. And this past weekend, there were 2 more television tapings, one in Mount Temple, another one down in Carlow, and I've no doubt that we'll have footage from both those shows, which involves Doug Williams, Scotty Mack, CJ Summers, The Ripper, and many more. We'll have them right here on TWC in the very near future, so keep watching. Our final question this week again talks about programming right here on the Wrestling Channel. It comes from Carl Scaff from London. The question is, when will or if will TNA Impact? Is it going to be right here on TWC? The answer to that question is, Carl, we're in the middle of talking to TNA about it right now. We're talking to the TNA promotion, and as soon as something comes through, we'll have it up here. We're always working to have the best promotions. Every week you're going to see brand new shows, brand new personalities, and every month you're going to see more and more new promotions. We are in the process of talking to NWA TNA about getting the TNA Impact show over here. We hope to have it very soon. Now we're going to take a little look at some upcoming dates right here in the UK and Ireland. Sunday, July 25th, Future Championship Wrestling is having a show in Dudley in the West Midlands. From Monday, July 26th, the World Association of Wrestling will begin a run of 5 weekly shows at the new Atlantis Resort in Great Yarmouth, ending on Monday, August 23rd. At the Selbyk Hall in Enfield, Saturday, 17th of July, it's Revolution British Wrestling. Premier Promotions presents every Thursday from July 22nd to September 2nd, this summer season of wrestling spectaculars. It goes down at the Worthing Assembly Hall. It's a high-impact roller coaster week right here at TWC, as next week we're going to have the following great matches. We started off with NWA Wildside, where we've got S. Fowler versus Sebastian, and Jason Cross versus Jeremy V. On Combat Zone Fake UTV, we've got a Joker special. First off, he takes on Chris Cash, and then on to Zandig in a death match. On Major League Wrestling MLW, we have Los Maximos versus the SIT, plus Kenzo Suzuki of WWE fame taking on the former WCW Hardcore Champion, Norman Smiley. This week on NWA TNA, AJ Styles versus the Red Shirt Security. Plus, we've got hardcore legends teaming up together. It's the former NWA World Champ Terry Funk and the former ECW Heavyweight Champion the Sandman. They take on The Gatherer. And in Ring of Honor High Impact TV, it's a challenge of the High Flyers, of the Technical Wrestlers, Donovan Morgan versus the Fallen Angel, Christopher Daniels. Not only do we have all those great matches next week right here on the Wrestling Channel, stay tuned for RF Video Shoot Part 2 with the Honky Tonk Man, the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. Finally, on the Bagpipe Report right here next week, Friday at 8 p.m., we have exclusively Jim Cornette, one of the greatest minds in the history of professional wrestling, one of the main men in Ohio Valley Wrestling, and one of the most influential men on every star today in WWE. Be sure to tune in next Friday night at 8 o'clock to check that out, plus all the week's news, reviews, and interviews, and much, much more, right here on the Bagpipe Report.